And so kind of more what we want to really focus on today as well and talk about and get questions, because I think we all see from our HOAs that they usually generate the most questions, and probably some of, for all of us that don't always go through our front counter for different planning aspects, just questions about exactly how we do this, when we do it, what do they want to see. So we'll be covering that today as well. But a lot of our HOAs are applying for landscape or xeriscape improvements, irrigation system upgrades, entry signage, lighting upgrades, and you see pictures here. I should also mention on our website, we do put the successful grant applications. So if you're curious as far as what others have done, how they did it, who they used, all that information is there for you to see, and those can be good resources just to even see what some of these examples we're going to go through look like in an application form. So what we're going to talk about, and Diana with planning is going to get into more detail, but when you're doing those typical HOA projects, there's really additional steps besides just turning in that grant application and neighborhood services at the end. And so what she's going to talk about is what's in the orange and green there, but really what they need to see before you really start going out and finalizing everything, because what she's going to show you can make a difference in what your final application looks like. That blue box is some of the stuff that I just went through, and then we'll wrap it up at the end, kind of reviewing some of that again. And then Diana will also briefly talk about what happens after funding. So Diana, it's on to you.
Thank you, Shauna. Oh, let me turn my video on here. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for taking time to meet with us. Every project, whether it's lighting, landscaping, walls, needs to have a plan. Obviously, we can't give you a grant for city money if we don't know what it is that you want to do. So all of the projects have to have a scaled drawing. If it's a landscape plan, we ask that you show existing trees, shrubs, things that are existing to remain. Those are typically shown as dashed circles for existing trees. And that's because there's code requirements for some of these items that if you are missing street trees, for instance, we would require you to replace those. And if you have street trees, then you want to take credit for those and not end up having to put in more trees than you expected in your grant process. And that's something that's really been a surprise, I think, to some applicants when they go through preliminary site plan review. They may be thinking that they're just removing turf and putting in gravel, and then they find out they actually have to add trees and plants. So it's important to give us as much information as you can about the existing conditions and what you're proposing to do. We need a legend with symbols, and we don't ask for a full irrigation plan, but certainly showing where the meter is located, where if you have a dedicated landscape backflow preventer or whatever for the system, because there are going to be modifications that need to be made for conversion from turf to gravel. If you have existing trees, for instance, you're going to have to put in a deep root irrigation system for those trees to survive because they're used to getting water in a different form. Labeling property lines, putting the dimensions on those property lines. You can go to the county assessor site and they'll give you some of that information is available for the dimensioning. Elevations, if you're doing walls or planters or gates or signs, you would need to have an elevation with dimensions that shows us what you're wanting to do. Lighting projects need to include a light plan that shows on the site where the light fixtures are going, what types of light fixtures, and the cut sheets. And I have some examples of that here in a minute. And then in addition to this plan, it's also helpful if you can include an aerial image of the project area. So this could be like from Google Map, you just do a satellite image that shows the locations so that the reviewers are familiar enough with the site. I think we can move on to the next slide. That slide had a lot of information. So changes to landscaping. Your first step, now that you've been to this meeting, will be to contact community development staff. And Steve Abrahamson is our primary point of contact, or any of the planners on call. If you call 311, you can also speak with them. But any changes that you do within your community to the common areas must be processed through community development. So this is your first step. And what you need to submit with your application on the scale drawing is show us the existing materials, the proposed materials, the legend and labeling of the property lines, right of way, and site distances. Also important to show if there's overhead power lines or any utility easements, because sometimes that can affect where you are allowed to plant things. And then for the grant process, you are required to have 3 bids. And I wanted to point out that planning doesn't review the budget or the bids, but it is important that you provide this early so that if there's changes to your landscape plan, let's say you got 3 bids to remove turf and put in gravel, and maybe they only specified cubic yardage for 1 inch of gravel, just a little bit. Well, one of the things we're going to review is how deep is the gravel? Have you provided funding for the irrigation system for the trees? What other plants are going to be planted? So you may actually have changes to your grant application that you get notified through preliminary site plan review that in order to meet code requirements, you're going to have to go back to those contractors and ask for revisions to their bid. And that will help you in making sure that when you get your grant application submitted, you're really confident that the numbers you're submitting are things that you guys can actually match the funds for as you need, and that it's work that is can be done in the time frame. So sometimes the projects get scaled back in order to meet the funding available. So that's it on that one. So what must or should the landscape plan have? It needs to have a north arrow. You guys are familiar with where you live, but planners aren't necessarily, and we can look it up online, but it really helps if your plan shows us the orientation of the site, a scale, a legend, which is shown here, the circled area, vision triangles at driveways, because we have code requirements that when you pull out of the driveways, you can look over smaller plants and you're not going to have your vision impeded by big bushes right at the street front. We also have requirements for the size of the plants adjacent to walkways for safety. So having all that information helps us give you a good review. The more information you give us, the better comments you'll get back. If you're missing this information, then the type of review comments you're going to get are provide us a plan with a north arrow and a scale and a legend. And that really doesn't help you with revising your bids. You want to get information that's going to help you make sure the contractor has addressed all the code requirements. Xeriscaping. I'll let Tina talk a little bit about this, but this is often done as part of a landscape project. It includes incorporation of high efficiency irrigation. It needs to include a vibrant palette of low water use plants. There are some rebates. I'll turn this over to Tina in a minute. And then the turf removal also requires new plants. So what I tell people is xeriscape, which is low water use plants, does not mean zero-scape with no plants. So please make sure you include green in your landscape areas. The turf is 100% coverage with vegetation, which transpires and affects the aesthetics and the environment. And if you replace all of that turf with just gravel, you're basically like creating a paved surface that's very hot. So part of our environmental efforts are to replace a percentage of that total turf that's removed with vegetation that helps with that. Tina, did you want to add anything here?
I did have a few things to discuss just about the Water Conservation Partnership. I don't know if this is the perfect time to do that, and I can address some of the bullets on the screen. Shauna and
Yes.
Diana, what do you guys think?
Please. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, excellent. Thanks for the opportunity. So I just wanted to say, hey, I'm Tina Sleeper from Water Conservation, and basically this is just one of our amazing partnerships that we do with my great colleagues, but part of the conservation goal is just to ensure that water is used efficiently and responsibly through effective water saving best practices and targeted outreach, and it's a component of the water resources plan. So there's been some confusion a little bit in the past. Water conservation provides additional funds to the total grant budget to help fund applications, as Shauna mentioned at the beginning, that are related to conservation, but the maximum grant award per neighborhood is still capped at 20,000. excellent for having a higher amount this year. And basically, our contribution helps fund qualified conservation projects while freeing up additional grant funds in the greater budget for additional neighborhoods, which could include other conservation projects. I appreciated that the landscape plan and all of that was discussed first, because that is very important that these grant applications, whatever the projects are, meet the other departments and meet the neighborhood grant process, because it just funds approved projects. But projects that would qualify for water conservation specifically, they have to have a clear connection to a water conservation best management practice as defined by the Arizona Department of Water Resources. Past projects that we funded include the xeriscape conversion, sprinkler head upgrades, smart controller upgrades. We're just here to help with efficiency, help with the plan that you've engaged your neighborhoods in pursuing for the good of the entire neighborhood. So whatever option that is, if it's related to a water conservation best management practice, I'm happy to meet with you to discuss it and provide resources to make sure that it's done using those best practices. The only thing I would say is, just addition to this, everybody has, the different categories has requirements and guidelines in those handouts. I encourage you to take a look at them. Under ours, the HOAs and multi-housing communities must participate in the HOA water budgeting program, which is simply an educational program that compares recent water usage as compared with an estimated water demand of the common area landscapes, and that's something we can provide. So if you're going to maybe get a smart controller or upgrade a sprinkler system, we just ask that you participate in that program. And so feel free to reach out to me. I think I've covered most of the bullet points. Let me know if there are other questions.
Thank you. Okay. So if you're wanting to upgrade lighting to your property, there are code requirements for lighting for safety and also to protect dark skies so that we don't have a condition where light is going in the wrong location and lighting up the sky instead of pathways. So you do that preliminary site plan review process, provide us with a site plan that shows the location of the lights, the type of lights, the photometric output, which is the amount of illumination or light that comes from the light source. And then we do a comparison to the code to make sure it's meeting the code. And we also look at the aesthetics and durability as well, so that you're getting a product that's going to last, that's not going to end up having to be replaced down the road. So this is the bullet list of things that you need to include with a fixture schedule. Whether it's hardwired or in this picture, it's showing solar. So for some of the more decorative lighting elements that people may do for landscaping or signage, it may not be required by code. So they decide to do more of a solar application. If it is something that's required for safety or part of the code, then we do require it to have an electrical feed so that we have that connection permanently and it doesn't change with a rainy day. But go ahead. So this is an example of the items that you need to include. The lighting plan is like a site plan. You're going to show where all the units of the complex are located, the streets, the sidewalks, and then you're going to have some key that shows where the lights are being located. In this case, it looks like they might be building mounted, and they're showing a cut sheet that shows what the fixture looks like, and even the bulb type, because that's what tells us how much light is produced by each fixture. And we want to make sure that it's dark sky compliant, that it has a shield, that the light's not going to go in the wrong place. And also so that it doesn't create glare. Sometimes putting in lights actually creates a condition in the evening hours where people have trouble seeing, and it puts everything in shadows and can actually be more of a safety hazard if it's the wrong fixture. We refer to those as glare bombs. So we're really looking at aesthetics and safety and dark skies and the environment for your community. Addition to or updates to walls. So changes to your walls must be processed through community development. If you haven't figured that out by now, everything comes through planning for review. The preliminary process allows us to take a look at what it is you're proposing, make sure that it's going to meet codes, and whether or not you would need a building permit based on the structural needs of whatever it is you're doing. If it's a repaint, that's different, but sometimes people want to actually modify the walls themselves. So contact us first. When you're doing changes to walls, you're going to provide us with a site plan. Now, a site plan does not have plants on it. So this plan here that you see is more like a landscape plan because it has all those little circles on it. That's what you would do for landscape. But the real important part for a site plan is that you show us where the buildings are located, where the streets and sidewalks are located, and where the walls are located. We need to understand what the materials are on the wall and the dimensions of that wall in terms of the height and how far away it is from, for instance, the sidewalk. Any lighting changes you'd also include, and then provide us with samples of the colors and pictures of the materials for the wall that you're proposing. So this is an example that shows a before picture on the right. And then they wanted to make modifications, basically painting the project. It looks like it was also included with maybe some landscape with a planter. So you want to include all that information so that we can respond to that. And when we're looking at walls, we would also look at plant material to make sure it's not something that would damage the walls in the future. A lot of the projects we see are wall projects where turf and sprinklers have impacted the aesthetics of the wall, or in some cases, the structure of the wall. So we want to make sure whatever plants you put in are going to protect the investment that you've made with your community in whatever work you're doing on the walls. And I'm going to turn it over to Dean Miller. He is our expert in signage, and take it away, Dean.
Thank you, Diana. So I'll be reviewing the sign permit applications or sign applications. The thing that is a little different for signs is that a sign permit will be required to install the signs. And I wanted to help you early on with the requirements and kind of get you on the right path for signage so you don't move in a direction of something that may or may not meet code. If your sign is part of an overall project, like Diana has already described, you would include it as part of that. But regardless of whether it's an individual project of just signage or if it is included with another project, I would recommend that you get in contact with me as soon as possible, and I could look at some preliminary ideas and give you some direction to get you going in the right direction. Make sure that it meets code, design requirements, and such. So like Diana spoke of, the more information that you provide, the better information or feedback we can give you. These are some of the basic things that you'll need. A site plan, like Diana described, only will have the location of the sign with dimensions to locate the sign on the property. Typically, these are entry signs. They're a lot of times, like in the photo, they're mounted to an existing wall. So it's pretty easy. But where it's located is not going to be an issue or a concern as far as measurements too much. But the elevation drawing, the materials, the colors, the dimensions, the more that you provide, the more feedback we can give you and get you on the right path. We don't want you getting bids for signage that everybody's agreed to, and then get down the line and find out that the sign's too large, it doesn't meet code, or it's not an appropriate material. So those are the things that we're going to look at preliminary review to give you some good direction. Next one, I think there's another slide. So items to include the elevation, site plan, cut sheets if there's lighting, especially external lighting. There's some external fixtures, paint color, material samples. And these are just basic. You're working with the sign contractor, and initially you can do a preliminary, just a sketch or whatever, and reach out to me and I can provide direction. But ultimately, you're going to want some kind of drawings from a sign contractor or a designer that could give more specific details on what you're looking for. But the main point I want to get across is if you can reach out to me as early as possible and get direction, so we can get moving in the right direction. That's the best way that I can help you.
Thank you, Dean. Okay, so your first step is going to be to make an application for preliminary site plan review. We call it SPR for short. And that was one of the squares that you saw earlier. I think it was the first one was orange, and then it went blue, and then went green. So this is the orange square that Shauna referenced earlier. You're going to provide this information to us. You make an application, and then we take about 15 business days to review those, and we will mark the plans up. And what this does is provides you early feedback from all different departments in the city to make sure that your application has all the components it needs to be a good grant submittal when you make your application for code requirements. So we have fire, traffic, police, transportation, a large team of people that will look at these. And then we will identify if there's any processes. We'll be able to let you know if your project needs, for instance, permits for construction after you're done with the whole process. This really, the preliminary site plan review saves you time and money because it assures that what you get from your contractors are accurate bids that don't reduce your project in terms of scope or funding or potentially denial or delays to your project. So it's really important, but it's also, you need to know it's not an approval. So we are just providing you a courtesy review before you make your submittal for a grant to make sure you're meeting the code. And then you may need to resubmit. If there's information that's missing, you're going to want to come back through this process again. There's no charge for it. And it's really just to make sure you get the best application in for the neighborhood grant as possible.